Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you all here today, this evening. I'm so glad you could come. My name is Mary Ann Mead. I'm the Assistant Director at the Southwest Harbor Public Library, and it's just really a pleasure for us to have you here. I apologize for my background. Normally I try and sit in the Holmes room, but we had a technical glitch, so you're getting to see the inside view of the my messy little corner. So this is where Command Central, we'll call it. During this strange time, we're all reshifting our gears, our dials, and shifting gears and learning new ways of doing things. For the library, we've been doing curbside pickup, which is working wonderfully, and people are welcome to come into the library by appointment, which is a new way of reaching out to the community. We're also having our annual Celebration of Art fundraiser, which for the very first time we're doing virtually. You can see all the items by going to our website. It'll take you to the bidding site. 90% of the artwork is also on display in the library, and so you can make an appointment to come in and view, and you can do a buy it now. And the great thing is you get a wonderful piece of art and get to support the library at the same time. We are so fortunate to have such a talented community that have been so generous with sharing their works of art with the library and the community. So that will end next Wednesday at 8 p.m. So there's still a few days left. We had several buy it nows happen today, so don't miss your chance. Right now there are 5 days left. And I want to also take this opportunity to thank all of you who support the library, because without your support, we wouldn't be able to bring you programs like the one you're going to see this evening. Now, before I introduce John Palfrey, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this evening's event. There will be a Q&A following the presentation, and you can submit your questions into the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen, just left of center. Melissa Haas, one of my wonderful coworkers, will be facilitating the Q&A session following the event. And as the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining, and the ability to provide a virtual program like this evening's is one such silver lining. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce well-respected educator, author, legal scholar, and innovator, John Palfrey. Throughout his career, John has demonstrated a commitment to rigorous thinking and creative solutions. He's president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Previously in his career, he served as the special assistant to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency during the Clinton administration, and was the recipient of the agency's Gold Medal for exceptional service. This is the highest national award that they have. He served as the founding president of the board of directors of the Digital Public Library of America. And he was executive director of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. He was a professor of law and vice dean for library and information resources at Harvard Law School. He was head of school at Phillips Academy, Andover, from 2012 to 2019. He's also the author of several books, including The Connected Parent, an expert guide to parenting in a digital world, co-written with Urs Gasser and due out in October. He's also our friend and neighbor. So please join me in welcoming John Palfrey.
Marianne, thank you so much. Thank you also to your colleague Melissa for setting up this event. I think one of the things that we have learned so much, so clearly during this COVID-19 period with all of its many hardships has been how much we value libraries and how much we value librarians, and your ability to pivot during this period, keeping people safe, but also being a place where people continue to be informed and engaged through the community. We are just so grateful to you for that. So thank you for pivoting here. When you first invited me to give a talk, and I was thinking of your beautiful Holmes room in the front with all the wood paneling, which I've had a chance to present in before. But this is novel and fun, and thank you for being game to do a Zoom webinar. Thank you also to my four colleagues who are joining us today. We have two teachers in Judd and Ashley, and Logan and Caroline are two students from high schools locally at MDI High School, and I'm really grateful that they are here to join me for this discussion. I promise you it'll be much more fun with them and with their insights, as you'll see. So I'll probably talk for of just a few minutes about this forthcoming book called The Connected Parent, and then I'm going to welcome this group of four in, and then I have some softball questions for them about learning in a digital age and the fall that we have ahead of us as teachers and as learners and as parents. And I hope that you will then jump in with questions in the Q&A for us, or populate the chat or whatever. We will then end with about 15 minutes, hopefully, of Q&A, so we'll probably go no more than about 45 minutes, knowing that Zoom fatigue is very real. One of the things we found from all the research this spring. So just a few words about the book that's coming out in October. It's called The Connected Parent, and the idea behind the book goes back about 15 years. When actually our own children were very young. So I have an 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. And so my 18-year-old is rising senior, my 15-year-old is a rising sophomore in high school. And around the time that our son was very small and our daughter was being born, my wife and I were in a conversation about what was the best way to raise them in a digital era. And all parents will be familiar with this kind of conversation that you have. And in particular, a bunch of basic topics came up, which is how much screen time should we expose our kids to, or allow our kids to be engaged with? How do we keep them safe? How do we protect their privacy? And those kinds of things that are very natural for parents, I think, to bring up. It turns out my wife, Catherine, was in graduate school at the time in a wonderful program in early childhood development. So she was studying very young kids. She's been for many years, as Ashley has a kindergarten teacher. And I, at the same time, was at a research center at Harvard studying the digital era and how great new technologies could be for bringing about a more robust democracy. And it was a time of great interest in trying to see how we could use technology to grow communities that were more diverse, more connected, stronger activism, and so forth, and many of us seeing the bright side of that, although of course we now see many of the downsides of it as well, which we could get into if you like in the Q&A. But you can see the dynamic at the beginning, which was I'm more of an optimist and more about how do we ensure that our kids have the skills for a digital era that are going to lead them to be able to learn more and to be more activist and to be more engaged as civic actors. And my wife was a little more thinking, I don't know if the screen time is such a good thing for little kids. And I think the answer probably is both are right, which is that there are important limits that we need to set as parents and as caregivers of any sort, and teachers and mentors for kids, but also there are really great things that can come of the technology, great opportunities, and I think we need to be able to seize those. So through a research center at Harvard, we developed a program called the Youth and Media Lab. And what is distinctive about the Youth and Media Lab, and maybe for Caroline and Logan, there'd be opportunity to get engaged. It's actually engaging young people actively in the research. And so we have interns and we have research assistants who are themselves young people who are helping carry out the focus groups and the interviews. And over the last 10 or 15 years, we have been consistently in the field asking kids questions about how they use technology, how they think about privacy, how they think about their safety, how they think about diversity, how they think about activism and civic life. and then trying to translate those things into what's useful potentially for teachers and for researchers and for parents to understand. But the first book that we wrote about it, called Born Digital, it's now come out in a bunch of editions, and you can get it, I suspect, through your local library, or you could get it online, of course, or at a bookstore. Born Digital was really focused on the research and is not really geared toward parents and doesn't have a whole lot of advice in it. So we would give research presentations as scholars. And people would come up and say, yeah, that's all really nice. That's what the research says. But tell us what you think. What's the advice that you would give to us as parents or as teachers about how to handle a particular circumstance? So this book, which comes out in October, is really trying to say, okay, we get it. There are, the research has continued to evolve, but some people actually want something actionable. In other words, what you could do in each of these circumstances. So that's what this book is about. We put forward a theory about connected parenting, which is at the core of it. I'll give you the 5 key elements that come out of the research. The first is for parents to be sure to keep the conversation open with kids. I think many times parents think they don't have that much to say about the latest technology or what young people are engaged in, but like any aspect of parenting, you just have to get in there. Second is to engage with the technology itself. I think often when parents try to talk about the fears that they have related to technology, if they're not credible, then it makes it hard to have that conversation. We see this with young people that you lose trust if you just try to clamp down on their technical activities rather than being engaged to some degree in the technology. That doesn't mean you have to be on TikTok as soon as they are. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily have whatever the latest app is, but you do need to be credible and to be engaged in the digital life in order, I think, to be effective as a parent. Third, to seek a balance between what is important in terms of support and creating fences for young people, but also independence. One thing that we see is that parents often try to clamp down on kids' activity online because they're concerned about what might happen. And there are reasons for some fears. We can get into that around safety and so forth. But it's really important that students, young people, are able to gain their independence over time and have your trust. And that's true, of course, in other aspects of life, but particularly when it comes to technology, as we've found. Fourth thing in the connected parenting toolbox that we talk about is embracing the positive sides as well as some of the concerns related to technology. So I think we'll probably hear some more from Caroline and Logan about some of the activism work that they've done to help this area get rid of plastic bags. And that's something that no doubt if that kind of campaign was carried out a generation ago, it might have been done door to door, it might have been done using old school technologies, but today any campaign like that is almost invariably carried out with technology as a part of the way to get that done. And we can give you lots of examples of young people having much greater effect and agency in the world by virtue of using these technologies really well. And then last, for connected parents, we talk about keeping an open mind about what the technology can teach rather than succumbing to our fears. And it's natural, of course, for us as parents. It's part of our job, I think, to worry about things like technology, but ultimately there's a great deal, I think, for all of us to gain by using new technologies. I think that in this COVID era, we can see both the concerns and the incredible value of being able to connect, to do something like this, even though we can't get together in the beautiful Southwest Harbor Public Library. Of course, the technology has affordances, and we have to keep an open mind to that. And I think there are many ways, even in our complex and emerging democracy, that's true. Overall. So those are the 5 keys that we put forward in the Connected Parenting book. And then we just go through a whole bunch of different topics, all of which 10 topics are based on questions we've gotten from parents year after year, every time we've given a book talk. So that's the format of the book. But enough on the book, and I'm happy to come back to it if it's at all useful later. But what I wanted to do is pivot now to the moment that we're in, this COVID era fall that's approaching, and just say a couple of things from our research and then turn it over to this fabulous panel. The first thing I wanted to touch on is the debate about screen time. And then the second one will be the things that we are seeing and learning about teaching and learning in the context of remote learning. So the first one is on screen time. I think many of you may be familiar with the raging debates that have played out in the research world, but also in sort of parenting world about how much time is too much for kids to be online. And in our book, we go through all the research that looks at this, and there's a ton of different research, of course, about kids when they're very young compared to students like Caroline and Logan, where they're going to do more or less what they're going to do regardless of what constraints we place on them. And there's a lot of different strategies to go through between young kids. And it turns out that, going back to my debate with my wife, it's pretty clear that for young kids, really, really young kids, it's actually not a great thing to have them exposed to screens. In fact, up till about 2 or so, it's just as well to have them not at all on screens if that's doable. We make exceptions for things like connecting with grandparents and the kinds of FaceTime and Zoom activities. Those are not harmful, and they actually can be quite good from a family development perspective. But things like imagining that having them on baby Mozart and those kinds of things, were, having their brain develop in those ways, there's just no science behind it. And in fact, if anything, there can be some cost to having them exposed to screens too early. So if you've got a very young kid, there really is no benefit to it, and we can show you the data on that. As kids get older, though, I think it's actually quite different. The story is different than what people think. And I think parents over focus on screen time rather than thinking about the quality of the time that young people are spending online. And the most recent big research on this came out in 2019. A research group from the Oxford Internet Institute, friends of ours at Oxford University, did a study of 35,000 American young people, actually, and found that if young people are on a moderate amount of time on screens, it actually leads to healthier outcomes by and large for kids, even from kids who are not online as much. There are, of course, extreme examples, and you do not want it to be too much. But what this research has really shown is much more about the quality of what young people are doing when they're online. And of course, some of it's learning, some of it's doing the activism that Caroline and Logan have exhibited, but it's also just connecting to one another. And as we talk about parents having part of our job being to worry, a lot of the job of a 15-year-old or an 18-year-old is actually to connect with other kids, is actually that social and emotional learning. And that happens very well, it turns out, for most kids online. And large-scale studies, small-scale studies all actually show the same thing. In moderation, it's actually just fine. So that's the big screen time debate, and lots of people are focused on this, of course, during the quarantine period where kids are locked on devices. I still believe as parents we have to kick them outdoors and have them play soccer and tennis and go hiking and all those kinds of good things. That's totally crucial. So I'm not all about screen times at all time by all means, but not to worry too much about the quantity and to focus more on the quality of the screen time. Last, and as a pivot to the panel, I wanted to focus a bit on this question about digital learning. So the debate, of course, this fall has been whether or not to reopen schools. And I'd love to hear from Judd and from Ashley their perspectives on this. I suspect they have been knee-deep in it in their school districts. And of course, safety needs to be number one. But closely aligned with that is, can we teach effectively in a digital era when kids are not able to come together, knowing that they get lots of benefits from their physical presence, and a lot of places not having a lot of choice, and a lot of parents not having a lot of choice when they also need to go to work. So I know there are lots of issues engaged in this. I'll share just a couple of initial reactions that I observed from our research and what we saw this spring. One is the very important issue of digital access, which is that we saw in the city where I live in Chicago, that about 1 in 5 young people in the Chicago public schools didn't have the internet access that they needed to be learners. They were basically shut out for learning in the spring. So that's an issue that we absolutely have to solve, whether that's actually about hardware in some cases, high-speed access, especially when libraries are shut, which are such an escape hatch when schools are out. And of course, libraries were shut this spring as well as schools, so that for the kids of greatest need, they really were shut out of learning in a dramatic way. So that's something we're going to have to solve this fall for schools that are not in session every day. Second thing is that schools that went asynchronous, in other words, that they did things that were not at the same time, did much less well in some degree for learning than those that were synchronous, that the motivation, the engagement for kids went way, way down. And so focusing on how we keep kids motivated when they are at home, when they're over screens, and how to keep them engaged and connected to one another, to the material, that's a real challenge. And of course, there are a bunch of ideas for how to address that, including having things be a little bit shorter and chunking them in different ways. But the notion of being a teacher in this era is a tricky one, and I will leave that in a moment to the experts. So if I might encourage Caroline and Logan, Ashley and Judd to come on the screen, and I will turn over the dialogue to some experts who are experiencing this kind of thing. So thanks, team. I'm really grateful for your willingness to be here. I'm super excited to be in dialogue with you here on Zoom. And first of all, if anything I've said sounds wrong to you, I encourage you to criticize it. Tell me I'm crazy at any point. Tell us how it really is. That's important. But I thought maybe just as an intro, I'll turn it over and we'll go alphabetical, maybe with Caroline first and then Logan. From the learner perspective, how you found it in the last several months as you've been required probably to spend more time online than otherwise, and what you're looking forward to or not this fall, and any advice you have for teachers and parents as we go into this unprecedented time. So Caroline, you're first and then Logan.
Yeah, so my online learning experience, I had a really hard time with it, with not being in a physical school and being home all day because there were so many distractions. So I think this year I'm gonna have like a separate, it might be really helpful to have a separate workspace in your house. Like whether that's like, I don't know, it's even a different part of your room. It was hard to do my classes like on my bed because I don't have a desk or anything. So I'm having an office space, or like office space set up for this year.
That's so good, Caroline. And may I just ask one other thing? So what is for those who may not be as aware, what is the likely plan for MDI High School starting when?
It's starting September 8th, and it's going to be 2 weeks of online learning. And then I think it's going to take 2 weeks to get used to the technology. So it might be, I don't know, there's talk of it being longer than 2 weeks. And then after that period, it's going to be hybrid.
I think they make a decision on after the first 2 weeks to see where they're going to go from there. And we might have 4 classes a day, but I think that's also still up in the air.
That's great. Logan, maybe you can tell a little about your story in terms of how you experienced the spring and what you're looking forward to or thinking about this fall.
I mean, I also really struggled with online learning. Being at home all the time and not really moving around much kind of sparked some chronic health conditions I've had for a long time. And that made it really hard to do all of the schoolwork and get it in on time. But I'm looking forward to this year because I think that teachers are really aware of that and willing to have those conversations with kids. It's also, I know for me, I had a lot more responsibilities around the house because my parents were busier, so I had to cook and clean more. And I had a lot of friends who were taking care of younger siblings, even like baby siblings. And so I hope that the teachers are aware in whatever way they can be that a lot of kids have a lot of responsibilities right now, even some people working through the winter to help with things around the house.
That's really important, Logan, and I suspect that Judd and Ashley would say the same thing from the adult perspective too, which is that for many of us, doing our work at home unexpectedly, and then having young people around, or older people actually, that you have to care for, God willing, not suffering directly from COVID or other health concerns, but even just in the ordinary courses, everybody's feeling a little sandwiched like this, and hopefully we can choose the assignments and the timing and flexibility and so forth in a way that allows everybody to thrive. But before I turn it over to Judd and Ashley, Logan and Caroline, any other advice that you would urge either teachers who are on this Zoom or ones who might hear this recording later to bear in mind in ways that they can support your learning digitally, especially this fall?
I guess it's hard for a lot of students to do. I mean, I know there was a lot of talk about having more time on our hands this, like with online classes, but it's hard for a lot of people, myself included, to do work at home when you're so used to having a separate physical school space to do all of that. So I think it was really helpful when teachers were aware of that and were willing to like work with students on that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think not assuming that students are spending all their time at home just kind of playing video games and hanging out. Because
if only, right?
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people have less time right now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, let's maybe bring in the two teachers. And Jed, since you are in terms of the kids you're working with closest in age to Logan and Caroline, I'd love to start with you and then go to Ashley to the younger kids. But when I was head of school at Andover, one of the great joys was I was able to be a U.S. history teacher of 11th and 12th graders. I know that's part of what you spend your time, Jed, doing, especially for 11th and 12th graders, but also for other young people. I wonder if you'd just kind of comment on your experience this spring and any thoughts you have about how we can do as well as possible this fall.
I have two daughters too, and so I may try to bring some of their experiences.
Oh, please. Absolutely.
I also had the experience of having a very poor internet connection, so I can relate to how difficult that is when your internet is not working. I did very little with video. Mostly it was using Google Classroom because I just didn't have the connection speed. That's now fixed. But my daughters had two very different experiences. My eldest daughter really enjoyed online learning. It worked for her. She could do her stuff in her own time. She had class meetings and so forth. But my younger daughter struggled a little more. She did fine, but it was much more structured. You know, for some people that structure is great. For some people, like my eldest daughter, it was great to have the time to do it on her own. And so I'm trying to figure out the balance of how to do that with my students in Ellsworth. You know, how do I give them the freedom to do the work when they have the time to do it, under the constraints that I'm going to have students sign in, take attendance for them, and essentially be there for a regular school period. And maybe the question I have for the girls when they have time for that is, do you think that kind of structure of being required to be there for certain hours is helpful or harmful? And maybe I'll leave it at that unless you have other questions for me.
Logan, Caroline, would you mind commenting on the sort of structure of being there at the same time? I mentioned this very briefly, just saying that my overall observation was schools that had some synchronous quality. In other words, that there were moments where you did have to be there, that was generally helpful, and that those that were totally asynchronous, that they actually had harder times engaging kids. But that is certainly not one size fits all. I'd be curious your thoughts in terms of Jed's question.
I'd say it was really helpful for me. I did talk to some people who really struggled to get there because they were taking care of like younger siblings or taking care of family members, and some teachers made them keep the video on, and that was uncomfortable for them. But for me, at least, it really helped to have to be there, because if not, it was too easy to just put it off.
How about you, Caroline?
I also think I did benefit from having to be there. It was nice. I mean, we only had one class every day in the morning, which was really nice. But yeah, I think going to that morning class helped me get the rest of my stuff done during the day, because it got me like in the mindset of, okay, this is a school day, I have work to do, stuff like that. But I also knew a lot of people who struggled to go to those classes, partly just because of their like mental health is really slippery at this time, and so it's hard to like sit in front of a computer and, you know, learn when there's like a pandemic happening outside, you know.
Unfortunate and true. That's really well said. Ashley, maybe we can bring you in, and you look like you're in a beautiful spot outside, a true MDI experience. You've been teaching younger kids, I understand it, and also have experience in a one-room schoolhouse, possibly even, and would love to hear your experience this past spring and how you're thinking about the fall.
Yeah, so it's definitely a big shift from the spring to the fall. In the spring, where there was no heads up that this might be where we were headed, I don't, I have iPads for all of my students in kindergarten, but we don't use them very much. We use them for like some phonics work, and that's about it, because I've always been very much a believer in hands-on manipulatives and interacting and learning through peer interactions. And when we're in the same room, we may as well do that in person. So being able to shift really quickly to doing all of that remotely with really young kids who, what I noticed the biggest challenge was that a lot of them were still going to work with their parents, or their parents were working from home, and they need a lot of support to do things independently, and they're pre-readers, so any instructions have to be video instructions or audio recordings, and then having them figure out how to access those things was really tricky. So the biggest shift I've made moving into the fall, knowing that ideally I'd love to have some students in person, even if it's for less time or less days of the week, particularly in the beginning, so I can build a relationship and get to know what interests them and what's going to motivate them to engage online. Is thinking about how to use technology to support their learning in an exploratory way. So not just sending them a video to watch and then draw a picture of, but how can I use good quality technology to support what we're doing? So some work I did this summer was on outdoor education, and how can I meld explorations they can have outside in their backyard, no matter where they live on MDI, and how can I use technology to support that? So learning about like the Seek app, where they can use that to identify plants just by taking a picture and finding things that are similar. Doing a bird unit of study with a lot of crafting of paper tube binoculars to look at the bird, describe the bird, and use that to answer questions through Merlin, which is an app to identify birds, and trying to find ways like that to have the technology support and enhance, and not just have it be passive consumption of technology. One challenge too for the spring was when you talked about screen time. It was really interesting. About half of my students' families were okay with screen time, and the other half viewed all screen time, even synchronous meeting with me, as screen time bad, I don't want it, so not engaged.
Wow, 50% of your parents, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Half of my students I met with regularly a few times a week, and we would read together, do math games together. I got much better at learning how to make games interactive synchronously. And we do play groups on Friday, which they loved. So we'd play things like Pictionary or Memory that we could do digitally. But it was just very interesting that the other half of my students I didn't really see for a few months.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And Ashley, I'll ask Judd the same thing, what's your reopening plan for your school and whether at your level or more broadly in the district?
So our district has voted to go, their board has voted to go remotely through September 25th. But the caveat is that if individual buildings can meet the safety requirements around ventilation and things like that, before then they could open individually. So I've been working at my school a lot, trying to get kindergarten in the building at least half day. It's not firm. We have to be approved to do that. And my hope is to get students in person at least half day to build a relationship and start introducing the technology to them and training them how to do that, and also helping parents know how to use it, because I think it was overwhelming for parents who had never used that technology before, and then all of a sudden they're sent with this iPad and 300 directions on things to log into and how to use them. So if we can really scaffold the learning for families and for older siblings, a lot of older siblings. Thank you, high school students who were watching young children at home and taking care of them. I don't know what some of our families would have done without you. I know that's a big load, but just helping them feel supported, and so it's not overwhelming.
Sounds amazing. Judd, what's the plan in Ellsworth?
Ellsworth is starting with students. They've decided to split the student body in half. We will see half of them on Monday and Wednesday, the other half on Tuesday and Thursday, and Fridays are a bit confusing even to me so far. I believe I'll be seeing half of them on one Friday and then another half on the other Friday for a part of their class periods, but we're learning on the fly.
It really is amazing in America that we're in a relatively small geographic area here between MDI High, Tremont, and Ellsworth, right? Three completely different approaches to the reopening of school. You think about in lots of countries, it just will be decided and everybody's doing the same thing. But I do hope that there is some work to study, in fact, the different effects of these different plans, so that if we ever have to do this again, we'll have a little more data behind it. But we've gone a little further than I thought in terms of time before opening it up. And I note that the chat has a few comments and questions in it. So Melissa, may I just turn it over to you to moderate any questions that we have coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start my video warning. Okay, good. Sometimes it goes a little wonky. So the first question we have is, I think that Ashley and everyone pretty much answered if school opening, so basically let me read it to you. Is the online school full-time, or would you have a specific schedule that allows you to move around or chat with friends as if they were in the classroom? I don't know who wants to tackle that one first.
I'll sort of jump in on that. The interesting thing that Ellsworth is doing, we're going to have cameras. And so when half of my class is in the classroom, the other half will theoretically be watching remotely and should be able to interact not only with me, but the students in the classroom.
Excellent. Logan or Caroline, have you gotten any sense of what that, sorry to cut you off, Ashley, any sense of what that's, if you are physically back in the space too, what that might look like?
I think at this point, it's until they make a second decision, we're all completely remote. And it seems like it'll be mostly Zoom and Google Meets calls. But we'll still be able to talk if it's a group discussion.
Okay. And there's also a note here to thanking Caroline for the suggestion to help students set up an area and ask for any advice that you, especially as learners, Logan and Caroline, would have for parents to navigate that world of figuring that part out at home, if that was, especially since you both have been open about it wasn't the easiest transition.
I guess, so I have two sisters who were both in middle school, so that was hard. I did it in my bedroom, and one of my sisters did it in their bedroom, and the other one did it either in my parents' bedroom or the living room. But none of us have desks, so that was really hard if we were in one of our bedrooms. I think this fall, I'm gonna have my own office space in one of my parents' offices. So that will be really helpful because I will even have the option to, or opportunity to leave my house to do school, which I'm excited about.
Logan, did you want to say anything about the setup? And after that, I have a couple of things I can say from the research if it's useful.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, but definitely you should go first if you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think as long as you're talking and communicating with your kids and really listening to the things that they're having trouble with and helping them work through those problems, I think that's the really big thing.
Logan, the research definitely says that that's really the number one thing in our, it seems so simple, but in our findings about connected parenting is keeping that conversation open and being good listeners as parents, which seems so simple, but turns out in fact to be really important and true. A couple of sort of mechanical things that go along with Caroline's suggestions, which I think were all right. One is the idea that if a student has a cell phone or something that is possibly a distraction in their view, it actually is extremely unhelpful. So, and the research is pretty clear about this. So if you can not allow that, in other words, put it in another space or in a drawer where you can't see it, that's very productive. When I was a classroom teacher, and Jen actually may do this too, I had a rule that as soon as students walked in, they had to put their cell phone in a bin that was off to the side. They couldn't see it, was behind a door. So if you actually can't even see the phone, it helps with your focus and your attention on the task. So that's one thing. And the second thing I'd say, just in terms of the setup and for parents to recognize, students will often say, it's okay, I can multitask. I'm actually really good at this. I can do multiple things at once. I can be whatever, Snapchatting while also doing my math homework, or Zooming while doing something else. Turns out that kids think they can, but they can't. Nobody can. Multitasking is not actually a thing. The real thing is called switch tasking. So the brain is able to switch quickly between tasks, but not actually to do two things meaningfully at the same time. So really important, I think, to have a series of rules about not doing that if engagement is important, and not sort of buying into the, oh, we can actually do this, because in fact it's not possible. A third thing that's a related bit from the research, which actually has to do with sleep, hasn't come up here, but it's actually crucial, of course, for young people to get sleep. They should be getting, between 9 and 10 hours. At Caroline and Logan's age, not likely, but that is the idea in terms of growth. Turns out that parents of younger kids, not the little ones, but the kind of like 6 to 12-year-olds, don't worry as much about it because kids tend to get enough during that period, but then dip down and get too little again. But likewise, shutting down your devices at least a half hour, if not an hour before, the research shows is very, very important for getting good sleep. So there are a bunch of things like that are in this book, or that you can find from good sources online. And a lot of that has to do with exactly, I think, Caroline's point, which is structuring the learning environment and structuring the way in which not just the architecture, but also the day and time is used. Those things are really, really important. And I think Logan's point about having it be conversational is probably the best possible approach to it. Looks like Ashley wants to jump in too.
I wanted to add, for our younger learners, when you were talking about a structured environment, John, makes me think about for our littlest guys, like K2 students, so much of the physical classroom is structured. The way they move from place to place is all a protocol, and they learn all of that as they enter because they're learning about their physical space, their bubble, and being safe with other people. And one thing that I am really hopeful for is having students have their own workspace. In the spring, it was challenging because when you're home and with your family, you have your own way of functioning. When you're at school, that's a different way of functioning and keeping your environment and your space set up. And for many students, it was really tricky to have the materials they needed available in a timely fashion. So sometimes meeting synchronously with a 5-year-old, if their materials are not available in the same place, there's so much going on in their brain that's distracting them from the learning because they just need to find their stuff. And there's so many distractions along the way, walking through their living room, finding those crayons, that can make it tricky. So I think for parents, it can seem so little, but just as much as this is my space where I learn, I have a chair to sit in because my body's mindful when I can sit up. It's much harder to do that on the couch when you're 5. And here are my things, I know where they are, so that my mental load and everything, my concentration can go on the learning, not sitting up and finding my things. So just setting them up in that way, because our youngest ones need that level of structure.
Great. And Ashley, I have another question directly for you, wondering if you and other kindergarten teachers in the neighboring towns have met to discuss any ideas for this year.
Yes, actually, we had a group called the Kindergarten Think Tank. So almost all of the MDI kindergarten teachers were part of that group, and we were discussing what our recommendations would be for the year, because kindergarten is so different, especially where we don't have universal pre-kindergarten. So many of our students, it's the first time coming to school. So some things that we've worked on are kinder kits that would go home. so that there are many manipulatives that they can use and we know exactly what they have. So if we started in person or had in-person time and found out the next day we're going remote, we can send them home with their own things. We know what they have. And it's things that families can feel comfortable with and know how to help their student. Another thing we've worked on are a series of short videos for parents talking about things like setting up a workspace is a little 2-minute video, reading with my Kinder reader, reading to my Kinder reader, and things to think about when reading together, and just supporting families. And we did that based on questions we were getting as kindergarten teachers, and doing it in short snippets to support families. We've also talked a lot about the need for family support and education, because there were a lot of questions that parents had, and we were all trying to scramble to get the resources to share and have them be easy and really parent friendly. And so having that done ahead of time, I think will be supportive, because we really want to partner with families and help families. So we've been doing a lot of that kind of thinking.
Our next question is asking how libraries should be thinking about supporting teachers and students in the upcoming academic year. Would students and teachers share what parents experienced online learning this spring and what lessons were learned by parents and students? It's kind of a multi-part question.
I don't know, Logan or Caroline, have either of you been engaged in anything in the library during the kind of quarantine-ish period? And is there anything that you think has worked particularly well?
I guess really it's such a simple thing, but the fact that there's still a way to get physical books is really, really good. I do almost all of my work on my laptop, so I wake up at 8 and I'm on my laptop until 5 or 6 o'clock. And being able to take a break and do some work and still be productive, but with a physical book is really, really nice.
That's so cool. And it actually links up to another comment I see in the chat from Kimberly Krieger, who was saying, you know, how do you work in some outside or movement time for older students ages 11 to 18, and actually having to go to a library to, you know, as part of the workday or part of the school day, that actually might be a good thing to build in, because of course in a regular school day, you have to do those kinds of transactions of moving around. And if it's just still and totally online, that's going to be tricky, especially for older kids, obviously. Or for all kids, really.
And just one very small thing on that. I think, like Caroline said earlier, this is a really tricky time for mental health. And it's proven that the less you move, the harder it is to deal with mental health issues, especially depression, which is really hard to deal with right now. And so that sitting all day, not moving, mixed with already all those problems is definitely something that's important to think about.
Absolutely. And if parents are wondering what the data show on this, it's pretty clear that in all, and this is going to be a depressing thing to say, I'm sorry, but stress, anxiety, depression, and suicidality are all actually up for this generation. So it is in fact a thing. And as young people often told me as the head of school, the struggle is real. So this is not a something that's just, you know, made up by some kids. It's actually the data bear it out. It is not based on most of the studies. Someone gets blamed on screen time or spending time online, but it is, as Logan said, it's tied to a number of different factors, and one of them is inactivity. So actually, I think that's a really, really important comment from the parent in the chat, but also a response from Logan. And I do think libraries, among other kinds of institutions, can be a part of the solution, but it has to be pretty deliberate, I think.
Yeah, my youngest daughter said online learning took all of the fun parts out of school, hanging out, moving around. She did well, as I said again, but she really missed the physical interactions, the playtime. So we really should be cognizant of that as we move forward.
Jed, given the age of your kids and the age of the students that you teach, do you have a response on this one from Kimberly's question about working in outside or movement time for older students? And is the school going to be a part of that or figuring that out?
We're going to hold PE classes in some level of normalcy as far as I can tell. So there was not a lot of movement from my middle school and elementary school kids during the online learning. So I'm sure that teachers really need to think about that as they move forward.
And then we have another one, and this is a kind of a bit of a pivot in a way, that there are two aspects to safety, content and EMF radiation. There seems to be little attention to the radiation issue, particularly for little kids whose skulls haven't fully developed. France and Israel apparently have banned Wi-Fi for lower grades. And is this something that any of you have heard that is being paid attention to in the increase in Wi-Fi for younger children? And the question was posed, they said, you know, I assume older children are constantly exposed to it due to phones, so the new situation may not be that different, but especially for younger kids, is that anything that you've heard anything about or people are considering at this time?
Ashley, given your expertise of kids of this age, why don't you go, and I can say a little about the broader research too.
To be quite honest, I haven't heard any conversation about that. I've heard individual parents that were concerned about that who have chosen to keep Wi-Fi out of their house, which makes total sense. But not in terms of like our systems approach.
Yeah, I would just say that there has been a bunch of research on this. There are a number of doctors who pay very, very close attention to it across the country, at least in the US. And when I was head of a high school, I had our medical doctor every year look through the literature to see if there's anything that we needed to be acutely concerned about. And the thought based on that research from our very good doctor was no. I think that the focus on younger kids is always the right one. And again, my sense of needing less in terms of screen time is absolutely right. I'm not sure I would go as far as Ashley's parents, the 50% who said they shouldn't have any exposure across the screen with a teacher, because I think there can be value to that, particularly in these moments. But I do think we can and should be more careful with much younger kids. I certainly don't think that the science is established to say it is dangerous per se for young kids. I don't think that's actually shown in the research, although there's certainly activists who make that case, and who, as a school administrator, I would get one note a year from somebody saying that we ought to do this, and would run it down, and then found that it was not something to be acutely worried about. Melissa's telling us we have run out of our questions, and I'm super aware that Zoom fatigue is also a real thing, so we should probably bring it in for a landing. But before we do, I want just to say a huge thank you, particularly to Ashley and Judd for being teachers at this time. You are underappreciated as a profession, but we're super grateful to you for doing it, and for doing it with such incredible care and thoughtfulness. Really, really remarkable public servants, so thank you. And for Marianne and Melissa equally for being there as librarians and figuring out how to pivot and to serve communities in the great ways you do. We would be lost without you. And Logan, Caroline, you made this way more fun. The future is bright in your good hands, and may this fall be a joyful learning experience in ways that maybe the spring wasn't so much, and look forward to following what you do. So thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the people who got to attend and listen to all these different ideas. And this is such a new time for all of us. And we're going to get through it. So thank you. And thank you, John. Thank you, Ashley, Judd, Caroline, Logan, Melissa. So take care. Everybody take good care of yourselves.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you guys have a great year.
You too.